This is Charlie Mike, the podcast. Veterans helping veterans, talking about things happening in the veteran community, things we've experienced and overcome, such as addictions, PTSD, depression, legal trouble, and we also promote veteran-owned businesses. If you're talking about it, we're talking about it. This is Charlie Mike, the podcast.
Yo, what's going on? Welcome back to another episode of Charlie Mike, the podcast. As always, I'm your host, Raul. Today, I have a special guest in the house. You know, I want to introduce you to Raul. How you doing, Raul?
Doing well, brother.
So this is Raul Herrera. We've been trying to get, linked up so we can do something together. Reading your story and hearing a lot about you as a person and what you're doing out in the community is moving. And let's start off a little bit. Will you do me a favor and tell the people who you are, where you're from?
Yes, again, my name is Raul Herrera. I'm from San Antonio, Texas, born November the 11th, 1946.
It's Veterans Day, huh?
You bet.
Yeah.
My mother had said that they threw a parade in my honor of arrivals because it was Veterans Day, and of course, San Antonio is a military town.
Yes.
So they were parades going on, and the drums were playing. It was great. My mother was happy that they were celebrating my arrival.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah. So San Antonio, how was life in San Antonio?
Oh, well, of course, I was from the barrio, and I lived near closer to downtown than far west San Antonio, but still part of the barrio. I went to Catholic school, Sacred Heart Elementary, and from there I went to Holy Cross High School. My mother had wanted me to continue a Catholic education, but my father, he wanted me to go to a school called Fox Tech. It was a technical school, and they had a high-rated architectural class program. But my mother won out, and so I went up for another 4 years at Catholic education at Holy Cross High School.
Okay, so with that, I gotta ask. So what did your father do for a living?
My father was a painter.
He was a painter.
He painted houses as well, but he worked for a contractor and did industrial painting and so on. I recall, interesting you mentioned this. My father taught me what not to become. Aside from personal issues that he had, he taught me that you need to find an indoor job. Oh. So in order to teach me, I rode my bicycle about it's got to be at least 8 miles to where he was working at this schoolhouse, elementary school. And then back in those days, they had no air conditioning. And so there was a lot of hardware involved in painting the door, trim, and so on. So he needed some help, and so he put me to work there. But, of course, the boss came along and said, "Who's he?" And so that's my son. I said, "Oh, okay, well, keep him working then." And so they hired me. That was my first job. Of course, I became a gopher. The painters, we want soft drinks for lunch and whatnot. So I'd have to get on my bike and take off and go to the grocery store and bring them some cold soda pops. And so then eventually I became a spray painter's helper. And I'd come home with my hair just painted up. And just I remember my father shoving Vaseline up my nose because of all that spray paint. They had no mask at that time. Right? So Vaseline was the best way to prevent all that hair from getting in your nostrils and your lungs. And I told my father, I said, I'm not going to be a painter, I promise. "No, I don't think you've learned." So I worked for 2 more years during the summer months as a painter, and I said, that's it. So that's why I studied hard, and I wanted to become an architect. But that didn't work. I wound up going into the Navy.
Why the Navy?
Well, first, primarily because my parents couldn't afford a college education.
So you initially enlisted for the education?
Yeah, specifically for the education. I didn't know about Vietnam.
Right.
I had, you're a high school kid.
Yeah.
You know,
Don't pay
you're not
attention.
paying attention. You see the news, but you
it's
turn,
not the same.
You turn the channel, and you don't want to hear it. And so, yes, I finally decided after a summer program that I worked for the city, I decided I needed to find a way to further my education. And the Navy, they didn't just offer it; they promised me drafting school. A little story about that. Once I got into boot camp, and I had boot camp in San Diego, California after I signed. And I left, by the way, 16 de septiembre. September the 16th is when I took over. That's Mexican Independence Day.
Okay, yeah.
So, but I wound up going to boot camp, and during boot camp, they have what they call classification. Classification is where you take a battery of exams to figure out what you're best suited for. And then they throw you into a big auditorium, and the chief, man in charge up there on the stage, had handouts for all of us. And those handouts listed the schools that were no longer available. And Draftsman Class A school was no longer available. So seaman recruit Raul Herrera raised his hand, and the man says, "What do you want, son?" I said, "Well, Chief, I joined the Navy because I was promised drafting school." And everybody started laughing. And I couldn't understand why. To me, it was the most difficult news I've ever had, because that's what I joined the Navy for, to further my education. And coming out of classification, a lot of fellow recruits were disgruntled about the news of their school being closed, etc. The upperclassmen were waiting for us outside. Upperclassmen, I mean, by that time, we were wearing dumb little old ball caps, and we looked like death warmed over, boot recruits, right?
Right.
And so the upperclassmen already had their little sailor hats on, the white ones. And they'd come and break into a jingle, and they'd say, "Mothball, mothball, don't feel blue. Our recruiter screwed us too." So, and by the way, mothball was what they called us boot recruits, because our uniforms were stored with mothballs to keep the silverfish from eating the material.
Right.
And so we reeked like mothballs, and that's why we got that name. It was the funniest thing. But eventually I told the man in charge of our crew, of our group, and I told him that in high school I had been awarded first place for an architectural contest. And with that, my parents sent me the drawing plus 3 letters of recommendation. And with that in hand, I went back to reclassification, and they offered me drafting school. All of a sudden, it was open once again.
Wow.
What they saw, well, this guy's capable. But they also offered me door number 2, 2 years on-the-job training in San Diego, California. And, hey, sunny California, the beaches, right? I took door number 2. Food for thought. Never pass up an education. So because my 2 years on the job training turned out to just over a year, a few months over a year, and then I got orders to swift boats.
So, what year was this that you enlisted?
I enlisted September the 16th, 1965.
1965. And when you enlisted in 1965, excuse me for not knowing this, I should know this, but Vietnam, how was Vietnam it was going?
Oh, yes.
And Vietnam was quite a few years, correct?
It was already getting very heavy because just like I said, in 66 is when I got orders for swift boats, and in 67, January, is when I went for a swift PCF crew training, and nobody knew what a PCF was. PCF stood for Patrol Craft Fast.
Okay.
And that's what this is right here.
Right.
This is a model of the swift boat that I served on, PCF 79, Patrol Craft Fast. So, but no, I didn't know anything about Vietnam or what it was, the chiefs there in the drafting section, because I got orders to 2 years on the job training in San Diego. And they eventually told me, says, "Son, you're going to Vietnam." and it kind of like hit me, cold blast of air hit me, and I said, my God, what's Vietnam? There's a war going on over there. So I started paying more attention to the news, and geez, it turns out through information in researching the book, there had been close over hundreds of actual resupply vessels that had successfully entered South Vietnam to carry on their campaign of the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese regulars operating in South Vietnam. And they didn't realize that the arms were coming in from the sea. They thought they were all coming in from the Cambodia side, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, until an event of the Vung Ro incident took place. And that was in February of 65, if I'm not mistaken. A helicopter pilot was flying a non-urgent medical patient along the coast and south, in mid-country of South Vietnam. And as the helicopter turned inland to go to the hospital base, they flew over this peninsula. And in the bay, they noticed what appeared to be a floating island, because greenery, but it looked like it was moving. So they went in for a second look and couldn't determine what was going on. And when they went down for a much closer look, they noticed that the decks were potted plants and palm trees and shrubbery, and machine gun fire started at them. Yeah, it was an enemy ship. It was a steel hull trawler, and that was the first one. It was called, very famous incident. That's what turned everything. That was a catalyst to bringing about swift boats and Operation Market Time.
So with that order to swift boats, did you know it? So what all did that consist of? Was that like a MOS, or was it just that
orders?
Yeah, just orders.
Just orders. Yeah.
And did they train you for what you were going to be doing on the
Yes.
boat?
Yes, when we went to Coronado in January of 67, we formed a crew. And that was the first thing they did when they mustered us in front of the Swiftboat headquarters. And this is in Coronado, California. That's where the SEAL team trains. Well, they told us that we would be assigned crews. And so the officers, the boat officers, the junior grade officers, Lieutenant JGs, Lieutenant junior grades, they call out individuals and they call out the boat officer's name. And the boat officer would raise his hand and the individual would go towards that skipper. And came time for me, and they said, Seaman Herrera, and I raised my hand, and he said, points to an officer over there, Lieutenant J.G. Edward Bergen. So I marched over there, and there was a gruff, stout, chunky boatswain's mate standing next to him. And so I saluted Mr. Bergen, and then he introduced, he says, this is our boatswain's mate. This is Boats. And I went to shake hands with Carver, and he just looked at me up and down, and he had a reddish brown hair, and he had a handlebar mustache, and he twirled his mustache, and he just looked at me, and he says, what's going on, Bean? And just like you're standing there, Bean, that's a slur, right?
Yeah.
But the man was a little bit too big for me to try to do anything about it, right?
Yeah.
And turns out that Bean has been my call sign for the longest time. In recent years, even some of my fellow Swift mates, officers and enlisted as well, they seem to shy away from calling me Bean. Mm-hmm. And I don't like that. I enjoy when my friends and my fellow Swift mates call me Bean, because it was given to me by my mentor and my nemesis, Bobby Don Carver. And he's the one that's pictured here in that, right here in this 8x10. That's Bobby Don Carver right there. I'll tell you more about that later on.
I got questions. Okay. So in a swift boat, so this was Swift Boat 79. I see you had 350 cals?
We had twin 50 calibers in the gun tub up front on top of the pilot house.
Okay.
Twin 50 caliber machine guns. Back in the fantail, the after section of the Swift boat, was a single 50 caliber machine gun mounted atop an 81 millimeter mortar.
Oh.
And our ammo ready box was back in here where we had all the mortars.
Okay.
We had illumination rounds, high explosives, white phosphorus rounds as well, 81 millimeter mortar. And my job, again, I was designated a draftsman, a striker, they call it, because I wanted to be a draftsman. So they called draftsman striker. But they picked me up just the same and threw me on a swift boat.
Right.
And so they needed a radio radarman. And so I wound up becoming the boat's radio radarman.
What does that consist of? What you are basically looking at radars?
Well, yes, there was a radar in the pilot house and a fathometer to measure the depth below us. Because, see, our swift boat was part of Operation Market Time.
Okay.
Which was coastal surveillance, preventing enemy ships from infiltrating, resupply vessels from infiltrating, supplying the enemy forces in South Vietnam. Well, my job was to stand next to the person that was driving the boat. Typically, it was my boat officer, Lieutenant J.G. Edward Bergen. But oftentimes there were other instances where I didn't have to be there 100% of the time. When we were on a patrol out in the ocean going back and forth in our patrol area, well, it was very relaxed, and there may be somebody else driving the boat. But at all times, we had our different stations. The gun mount on top of the pilot house, behind the twin 50s, someone would always be there at the ready, and we'd only uncover the aftermount when we go into general quarters or something. But
right.
We had an engineman. We had the boatswain's mate. He's the one who basically handles the maintenance and sees to it that the boat is in top shape for patrol. That's the boatswain's mate. And the engineman, and we had the gunner, who happened to be a torpedo man. That was his MOS, as you say. His rate was at a third-class torpedo man, Bob Middleton. And as I said before, the boatswain's mate was Bobby Don Carver. Our engineman was Ronald Reinhardt. And we trained, those individuals trained together in San Diego and Coronado. And when we got to Vietnam, we picked up our fifth enlisted man, the deckhand, the seaman. That was Timothy McNamara.
So in a boat this size, in the water, how many people consist of the crew?
5 enlisted,
right,
and 1 junior grade boat officer. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
And so when you're on the is this a 24-hour station?
Yes. We'd leave in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
I'd go out and gather stores, as we call it, groceries.
Right.
For the 24-hour patrol. Most of the time, sandwiches.
Right.
Okay. And soda pop or we call it bug juice, which is Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
And so that we had a refrigerator. We call it a reefer. Inside the cabin, we had a refrigerated storage area, so we kept food there. But sometimes we'd wind up getting steaks or something by chance, or we'd put alongside a destroyer. We'd get some ice cream and some good meals off of them.
Now, Raul, I have to ask, you are a published author. Capturing Skunk Alpha, how did it come about? What was the point? What made you write this book?
This man right here, Bobby Don Carver, was the reason why this book came to pass. When I returned from Vietnam, let me go back just a little bit.
No, go ahead.
That first chapter, Spirit, took place on December the 6th, 1967. Well, that's when he was killed. When we captured this ship, the trawler, on July the 15th, 1967, Carver was the individual right here on the fantails aftermount, Mount 52. He was standing behind the machine gun and the mortar. And this mortar was unique. You know how mortars usually
Up and down.
Up and down, right? You drop it.
Yeah.
And the higher the angle, the closer the enemy is, right?
Right.
Well, this mortar had the ability to go to trigger fire mode.
I've never
Fire mode.
I never heard that.
Yes, sir.
Know that was a thing.
So, as we were attacking the trawler, and we were within 75 yards. Ultimately, we were within 75 yards of the enemy ship as it approached the mouth of the Saki River on the Batangan Peninsula, and this is south of Da Nang and south of Chulai as well. Our boat officer and I was standing right next to him in the pilot house, making sure that we were getting close to some hazardous areas. So I had to make sure that I warned him to be careful with those areas and kept my eyes on radar and radio communications as well. But he ordered the bosun mate to fire a round of high explosive, and he missed. He hand-loaded a round of 81 millimeter white phosphorus, lowered the barrel, took aim, and fired that round, and it went directly in the pilot house of that ship on the left-hand side, which is the port side. And that thing, I was in the pilot house, and it was ahead of us. The trawler was ahead of us, and I saw the explosion. It turned into a just white ball of flame. And we figured, no one could survive that. No one could have survived that. And it forced the vessel to run aground, and we was able to capture it. But long story short, the Viet Cong knew that it was PCF 79 who had brought that trawler down. And so they had a bounty out for us. And on December the 6th, we were ordered to do a psychological warfare mission, which was called Chuhoy, Give Up Your Arms. It was broadcast. We had speakers on the left-hand side on top of the cabin, and they were broadcasting propaganda that's aimed at the enemy to lay down their arms and come to our side. Well, as we approached, you may or may not have heard of the My Lai massacre. That was a very difficult, terrible situation where an army officer and his men massacred some civilians. It was a My Lai massacre, the village of My Lai. And
you said My Lai?
Yes, M-Y-L-A-I, 2 words, M-Y-L-A-I. Well, there was a river south of that area, and again, this My Lai village is just south of where we captured the ship. And just south of that area was a river, Sang Tra Kuk. It was the river that led to Quang Ngai City. Well, just right north from that entrance, that river entrance, were 3 little hamlets, 3 little groups of huts. It was called Kole. Kole 2, Kole 3, Kole 2, Kole 1, south to north. And ultimately we passed once, we passed twice, and on the second pass between Kole 2 and Kole 1, we got ambushed by 3 bunker positions. Ahead of us, in the middle of us, and behind us. And Carver took a round through his right eye, and he still had a pulse when he was in the helicopter after he evacuated, but he passed. And bringing back to when the chapter Spirit is, I read, that took place not the night of December the 7th. It took place the next night, because the first night we got back to base and we were so torn up that we drank ourselves to sleep.
Yeah, it's understandable.
And the following night, as I lay in bed, is when chapter 1 takes place, Spirit. Our boat officer was transferred to separate duties because he was then going to be leaving country soon, and the rest of the crew was split up. The gunner, Bob Middleton, and I, we stayed on the 79 boat, and another crew came on, a new boat officer and engine man and so on. Months passed, time came close that it was time to leave. May of 68, April of 68, late April of 68. And by that time, I had difficulty going in the back of the fantail, especially at night, because knowing he had died on this boat, that I was still on patrol. So it was a difficult time. But I came home, and I felt fortunate that I hadn't experienced any physical, no bullet wounds. I don't have a Purple Heart. And I gave thanks for that because, I said, wow, I'm back. But I'd see vets, obviously Vietnam War veterans in San Antonio, long hair and wearing their greens and bush hats and their jungle boots. And they looked a little disturbed from my point of view.
Right.
And I thank God that I survived all that mental anguish. What brought this book about is that little by little, I started having difficulty taking showers. I couldn't go to the bathroom and close the door. Fright came over me, chills came over me. I felt the boatswain's mate presence around me. I felt it. I mean, it would make my hair stand on end. And back in those days, there wasn't anything called PTSD.
Yeah.
And so you just don't talk about those things with even your buddies. You
Right.
just don't, not much less your spouse or anyone else.
Yeah.
And eventually I wound up I wouldn't take showers because I didn't want to close my eyes and shampoo my hair because I knew that the minute I'd open my eyes, I'd see Carver's bloody face, just like I'm seeing you face to face right now. And that just destroyed me. I just kept dealing with it. That's what you did. You didn't seek help. It wasn't until then my first wife's mother of my children, 5 children that I have, her grandmother took the entire family to Greece, to the island where her house was, her little village. And I was sitting on the beach with my son, and I saw out in the GNC, beautiful ocean, I saw a tattered fishing sailboat, tattered sails, and it flashback. I don't know if you've had flashbacks yourself.
Yes, sir.
My flashbacks are diesel fumes because the back of the swift boat always had the smell.
Okay.
If I go behind a diesel,
Right.
I'm back there again. And so, again, I flashed back to Carver, and I kept questioning in my mind, about Carver boats. Why are you doing this to me? Why are you tormenting me so? And as I'm sitting there watching the sailboat, that fishing boat, well, it just dawned on me. Isn't it like an epiphany? He wants me to tell the story. He wants me to tell his story. He wants me to tell our crew's swift boat story on PCF 79 and the overall swift boat story, which to date I feel very disappointed that unfortunately Vietnam War history tends to exclude the Navy's participation and accomplishments during the Vietnam War, and in particular swift boats, because we shut down that North Vietnam mission of resupplying their troops through the sea. And that's why the story came about. I came home, my mother gave me letters that she had saved. I numbered the letters chronologically by date order, 1, 2, 3, 5. The last letter that I wrote to my parents turned out to be 79. That's my boat number.
Oh, wow.
PCF 79.
Yeah.
I gathered information. I wrote to the government asking under the Information Act.
Yeah, the Freedom Act, right?
Yeah, Freedom of Information.
Right.
And I started receiving documents, confidential, declassified confidential documents. I did a chronology of the events taking place in the United States, the race riots at that time, turmoil, anti-war protests, everything. I did an outline, but when I started actually writing the first chapter, what I thought would be the first chapter, when I started writing the story, all those episodes in the shower stopped, and I haven't had them since.
It was your therapy.
It was a catharsis, major catharsis. A day doesn't go by. I mean, look at us. Here we are. Yeah. I'm talking about Bobby Don Carver, my mentor, my nemesis. I've got a story to tell you about, how I wished death upon him once before for the things that he did to me. I mean, he was constantly picking on me,
With love, though.
Well, no, not at that time. Not with love. Okay. He was, if I may pardon the French, he was a hard-ass boatswain's mate. I mean, a salty sailor. I mean, just. But like I said, he was my mentor. He was my nemesis, and I owe it to him. And as a tribute to him, I've dedicated the book in his honor and his name, and to the honor and memory of the 50 swiftboat sailors who lost their lives while serving on swift boats. So that's what the story's about.
If I'm being 100% honest with you, Raul, I didn't know how big of an impact the swift boat was during Vietnam. It's something that was never brought to the attention as far as media. When you think of Vietnam, you mainly think of honest army. Mm-hmm. So the ground forces. Yeah. So that's what I thought about until we met, and then I started to do more research, and I feel like, golly, you filled it in for me. Now it's just so with writing the book. How long did it take you to write this? I'm curious.
Oh, you took me by surprise with that question. Well, I tell you, it took me to get it published. I started this journey more than 40 years ago.
40?
40 years ago.
Yeah.
My children, my son Anthony, he was, I guess maybe 2.5 years old. And I had an older daughter, Odessa, and then Angela. There was 3 of us that went on the trip. And later, I had Michael and Eileen, twins. But it took me that long. Like I said, when I came back from Greece, my mother gave me those letters that I had written.
Right.
And I started doing all the research back then.
Yeah.
But a lot of personal matters in my life that forced me to put the book on the shelf. And I've always thought, and I've always believed that when the man says it's time, it's time.
Right.
The granddaughter that I have, Camila, she says, "Grampy, it's God's plan." And it is. It is. You just have to listen to when he the Spirit, like to say, the Spirit moved me.
Right.
And it finally came to pass, and things fell in place, and thankfully Texas Tech University Press are the publishers of my book, and of course they have the Vietnam Center there at Lubbock.
Right.
And that's the second largest depository of memorabilia from Vietnam War.
Is the other one in New Orleans?
I don't know. I haven't heard about one in New Orleans, but Texas Tech is the largest next to Washington.
Okay.
The archives.
Okay.
Archives.
Wow.
And by the way, there's 2 for anyone who is interested. There were 104 Mark I swift boats manufactured out of New Orleans, out of Louisiana. Seaward Seacraft were the manufacturers. And these boats were already on the water. There was no cabin. It was just a pilot house and a flat after section. And they would use these boats to take crews and equipment to the oil rigs out of Louisiana.
Oh, wow.
So then the government ordered 104, what became 104 Mark I swift boats. PCF number 1 is a static display at the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C. PCF 104, the last one, found in Washington, and it wound up being in Coronado. It's part of a 3-boat static display. There were 3 operations, naval operations. Task Force 115 was the swift boats. Task Force 116 were the game wardens. Those were the PBRs, the ones that were in the rivers. They had jacuzzi engines.
Okay.
Okay, no propellers. It was jacuzzi-driven propulsion. And then Task Force 117 were the riverine force. And they would have monitors, and they'd go and take troops along the canals and the rivers, Vietnamese troops, army troops, whatever. So there's those three operations that took place in Vietnam.
Well, would you have, in front of us, we have a couple of things. I want to be sure to talk about them. I don't want to, well, first we have the picture, and the picture is of...
That's Bobby Don Carver. Bobby Don Carver. Boats were made first class, Bobby Don Carver, which, by the way, I don't know, the picture shows him holding an AK rifle. That was taken off of the trawler. That was taken off the trawler.
The one that was captured?
Yes.
Okay.
We captured the trawler on July the 15th, 1967. Days later, on the 19th of July of 67, we were ordered to get in our dress uniforms and head north to Da Nang, the largest harbor in North Vietnam, for an award ceremony. We wound up getting personally decorated and congratulated by Premier Nguyen Cao Ky and Chief of State, the President of South Vietnam, Nguyen Van Tu. And you'll see him, he's got a floral lei.
Yeah.
This is after the ceremony took place. And that's why he's pictured there, carrying that rifle taken off the trawler.
Do you remember that day?
Oh, yes. Yes. As a matter of fact, for those interested, I've got a YouTube channel called Skunk Alpha, and I've got numerous historical documents in there. CBS News crew was there, and I've researched and I found, and I received from CBS.
They were there at that day?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
ABC was there as well.
Right.
Because in this video that's on my YouTube channel, you'll see that the 2 gentlemen, Key and Tu, were being interviewed by CBS, and then the ABC newsman puts his microphone up to listening, and it says ABC, but the reporter was from CBS, and it was awesome. It was really something real. It's the Stars and Stripes, Pacific Stars and Stripes ran a full page section of that event that took place, but that's where that took place there.
We got the American flag up in the front. What's the significance of that American flag right there?
Well, this is the flag that our boat PCF 79 was flying the night that we captured Skunk Alpha.
The actual flag.
Yes, this is the flag right here, the one that we're flying those colors, and you'll notice the tattered.
Yeah.
The flag is rather tattered, but that's because of all the salt and battering that we had during the patrol periods that we were out at sea. But I was very proud to have that. Another sideline of number of things that I brought back from Vietnam. I don't know how, but the actual combat, and it's in my book, a picture of it, the actual combat chart for our patrol area when we captured the trawler. That includes the Batangan Peninsula, where we captured the vessel, and also the location where Carver was killed. That combat chart wound up in my sea bag. I brought it with me. Another thing is I brought back, we were given permission when the ship was brought from where we captured it north to Chulai, our base, because I was stationed in Chulai, Coastal Division 16. We were given permission to board the trawler. And one of the artifacts I took off of it was this right here. You can spot that quite well.
Yeah.
This is binoculars, Zeiss binoculars that were taken off of the trawler. You'll see a huge hole right in here in this one. It may have been possibly at least a 50 caliber round.
Hey, those are some heavy duties too. Wow. If somebody was reading the book, what would you say? Do you have a favorite chapter? Is there something that you always say start off at this chapter if it wasn't the first?
No, not really. I mean, I hadn't the foggiest idea. I wasn't born an author.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You know, I was forced into it, and I learned along the way. I was fortunate to be able to develop the talent of writing with an Hispanic magazine out of Houston. It was called Nuestras Vidas. I wrote numerous articles for them. And then I also have written articles about the swift boat, about the trawler incident, Sea Classics magazine, and a number of magazines that I've written for as well. New York Times, as a matter of fact, I had an article published there with the New York Times about this incident. But it's been a long journey, a long journey.
So tell us a little bit about the you said 40 years. Tell us a little bit about the process of writing the book.
I will, but I recall what you asked about the previous question you mentioned.
Yeah.
Dead zone.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Okay, the journey. I was fortunate enough to have. Yeah, I mentioned. Okay, back to the trawler capture.
Yes.
We were the last line of defense, swift boats, because we were shallow draft, right? The next line of defense from the beach out towards the ocean were Coast Guard cutters. And then further out from them were the larger vessels, the destroyers, okay, and minesweepers. It happened that this particular trawler, we knew that it was coming in. Mm-hmm. Aerial surveillance aircraft spotted it on July the 11th, and it maintained contact, aerial surveillance, and then the destroyer, the USS Wilhoit, they wound up catching up to the trawler. The trawler went dead in the water the following morning, and that's how the title Skunk Alpha came about. In the Navy, an unidentified seaborne vessel is called a skunk.
Is it an acronym?
Skunk, no, skunk.
Oh, okay.
That's just a name given to an unidentified contact.
Okay.
Unidentified. Yeah. And the first one after midnight is Alpha, then followed by Bravo, Charlie. Yeah. So Skunk Alpha, Skunk Charlie, Skunk Delta.
Okay.
Out at sea, you got a bunch of skunks all over the place. Okay. They're identified. So that's how the title came about. But it turns out that on the way back, there was a psychological chief for I Corps. There were 4 core sectors, war zone sectors in Vietnam. I Corps on the north, next one south, I Corps 2, and then 3, and then 4 down on the Mekong Delta area. The U.S. Coast Guard, the Point Orient, was on the right-hand side of the trawler as we were coming in, as we followed it coming in. We were on the left side, the port side. On the board, the Coast Guard cutter, they had loudspeakers. And during the middle of the night, because the trawler came in the darkness of the moon, right? It approached the Batangan Peninsula as it approached midnight. And before that, it went within 5 miles from the Coast Guard cutter came close enough to the trawler. The trawler had no radar. So they couldn't tell who was out there, right? They thought the coast was clear. The Coast Guard cutter came close enough with their loudspeakers. They blasted a "Give up your arms" message that was recorded by the psychological team in Vietnamese. And they ignored it. Well, the gentleman, the officer, the U.S. Navy officer who had headed up that psychological team on the Coast Guard cutter, once the action started, he rewound the tape and started recording the communications. So the details that I put in the book of the actual engagement is based on actual radio communications of that event.
You also put that in the book trailer, correct? On your YouTube?
Well, yes, there's a small, my son Michael stripped part of the full book trailer that I have out there on my YouTube channel. Again, the YouTube channel is called Skunk Alpha. But there's a 3.5 minute full book trailer, extensive, lengthy. But my son captured part of it, and he also used the audio from that audio tape that I have of the actual combat engagement. This took place over 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And I still have that actual audio, combat audio. Not too many people have things like that. And so he used it, and he has a appended video, if you will, of that particular book trailer.
Yeah, the book trailer that you have on YouTube is quite powerful. So was it yours or your son's idea to
No, his. He surprised me. Michael surprised me.
That's awesome.
He didn't tell me he was doing it. He just he wanted to learn more. He found out that I had an audio, and he said, "Send it to me, Dad." So I sent it to him, and he said, "This is a good idea." He's good at doing that. He helps me a lot with my book event flyers,
right,
as well.
With Jesus, it's so with all that, I forgot where I was going. I apologize. So right. What was it important to you to use? I see that you used a lot of the historic footage, not footage as far as, but the actual articles and things that you have. You incorporated it. Was that important to you in bringing the story to life?
What's in the book, you mean?
Right,
or
yes.
In the videos?
Both, actually.
Well, in the book, obviously, yes. I wanted to be as accurate as I could in describing it. Not only do I go into detail about the capture of this enemy ship, Skunk Alpha, but I also found it very important for me to tell the overall swift boat story. Because there were numerous of trawler incidents that took place even before we got to Vietnam.
Right. And
some of them, before the swift boats got there, Coast Guard cutters were involved in the capture and the sinking of these enemy ships. So I wanted to highlight those accomplishments, seaborne units, Coast Guard and Navy accomplishments, and that's in the book. That's right. In the book as well.
So do you think how has telling your story and writing this book, well, you spoke on it a little bit earlier, it's impacted your life as far as a positive thing? So you mentioned that it was kind of like on a therapeutic, side of it. Did you have to seek anyone's permission? No. Okay. I was just curious. I didn't know. Yeah.
I just it's all fact.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that anyone's going to come back and tell me what you wrote is incorrect.
Right.
But because I've got the data to support it.
Right.
I've got the documentation to support all of what that's in the book.
So far, reading, how is the overall? I guess what's the overall people who have read the book? What kind of reviews? What kind of feedback are you getting back?
All positive, all positive. Things like, "Gosh, I didn't know you guys did that much, or you even were involved in Vietnam." And some ladies actually come and buy the book because their nephew or their son was in the Navy, and a lot of times people come and buy the book as a gift to their grandparents because nowadays, the grandchildren are, already up and married as well.
Yeah.
And hey, Grandpa was in the Navy, and maybe he'll like this. And so, it's one interesting thing. Visiting with VFWs or American Legion posts, I always start off with, how many of you honestly know what swift boats were about in Vietnam? Even military types, even vets that served in Vietnam didn't know about swift boats or Navy.
Right.
And, like you mentioned earlier, it's the ground forces, all credit given to the ground troops and their efforts and accomplishments. It's time to bring news about, hey, Navy was there as well.
If there was one thing you wanted your readers to take away from the book, what would it be? Basically, sharing that swift boats
Service.
Right.
Service to your country. A patriotic duty. Again, I didn't even consider going to Canada or anything like that. It's just what's within each individual. And for me, I joined the Navy to get further my education. I wanted to be a draftsman, but yet when I was called, I answered.
That's awesome. With you being a published author, have you been able to connect with people that have experienced or any of your old swift boat members?
Experience in what?
Were you able to just communicate? And
oh no, we had. I'm a former president of the Swift Boat Sailors Association, and that was, again, perhaps maybe that caused further delays in the advancing the book as well.
Right,
I was heavy into it for a number of years, and so Swift Boat membership is sadly dwindling. It's sad to see messages come across almost on a weekly basis now that this so and so has gone on his final patrol. It's as a matter of fact, we've got only 2 more reunions that are scheduled for our organization because our numbers are dwindling. Difficulty with our medical conditions, and many of our swift boat sailors are in their mid-80s, the officers in particular, and so it makes it difficult for them to plan reunions and go to reunions.
Right.
So we've got 1 more reunion scheduled somewhere towards the East Coast, not necessarily on the East Coast, and then the last one will be back in San Diego, where it all began. Wow. I was fortunate I was the president of the association at the time when the dedication of the Vietnam Unit Memorial in Coronado was established. I may have mentioned that. In Coronado, there is a 3 boat display, static display, and also a memorial wall that has the names of all Navy and Coast Guard personnel that died in the Vietnam War. It's a tribute to them. So I'm very proud to have been able to be a part of that.
That's amazing. So what's next for your media tour? What do you have coming up?
Well, I'm of the viewpoint that the book stays alive as long as I stay alive.
Right.
And
hopefully after as well.
As a matter of fact, I just recently, last week, I mailed the book to news anchor in San Antonio at KSAT TV. And so hopefully I'll hear back from him. I'm doing my best to try and reach out. I'd love to be able to. I have this grand idea of hopefully. My goal is to share the swift boat story. A lot of people say, yeah, he's just trying to sell his book. Well, okay, that's the swift boat story.
Right.
I'll never be able to recover financially from all that I've put into this effort.
I understand.
Never. It's been it came from the heart, not from my pocket. That's what it's for. And now, what happened? What I'd like to do is, a couple of years ago, I saw on a news report of the NASCAR 600, I believe it's called, the NASCAR 600 race. It's always held on Memorial Day. Mm-hmm. And it brought a tear to my eye because the premise of this one news report was this guy was taking an older gentleman and a teenage boy or a young adolescent, giving a tour of the garages for the race cars, and they came and stopped upon one of the race cars, but it was covered. It had a cover over it. And the reporter was explaining that the purpose behind the NASCAR 600, 600 miles of remembrance or something along that line is what the event is called. Well, they took the cover off of the vehicle, and in front of the driver at the bottom on the windshield, it had that older gentleman's loved one etched in the glass.
Oh, wow.
And I said, Bobby Don Carver.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to see if I can reach out to somebody that could perhaps consider, maybe it's way too late for this year, but maybe for next year's race, try to reach out to someone that has connections with NASCAR 600 Miles of Remembrance and pitch the idea to them to reflect on his contribution and the swift boat contribution at large. And so perhaps I know the book is sold outside of the United States.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yes, it has.
Man,
I was surprised. And I've been contacted by some people that have purchased the book, Navy-related individuals that got wind of it somehow and enjoyed the read. So it's out there, but it could go further than beyond Houston and Pearland and Texas and beyond. That's where my hopes are.
So what's next for you? What do you got coming up?
Well, this weekend I'll be in Rockport Fulton Book Festival. Mm-hmm. I'll have a table there, offering my book as well, and I'm scheduled in June to do a book signing in Austin as well. Lone Star Festival. It's a book festival. There's going to be an indoor festival as well, so I'm looking forward to that. But any opportunity, I have a PowerPoint presentation to offer veteran organizations or any civic organization that's interested in learning a little bit about swift boats. It runs about maybe 30 minutes, and I have a slide presentation with that PowerPoint presentation. And so I'd be happy to hear from anyone.
Yeah. So how would people reach out to you if they wanted to?
I can be reached at Raul@skunkalpha.com. Raul@skunkalpha.com, and that's ALPHA.
Now, if people were interested in finding your book, how are they able to purchase it?
If you go to my website, again, if you would just Google Skunk Alpha by itself, just Skunk Alpha by itself, you'll get about 3 or 4 or 5 pages of links related to my book. But one of those links will take you to my website, which is skunkalpha.com. And in that, in the landing page, you'll find a QR code or a buy now button, and I can sign the book and ship it to you as well.
That's amazing, Raul. I really appreciate everything that you've done to bring the Swift Boat story to life. And do you have anything that you would like to say before we close out?
No, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to take the Swift Boat story far and beyond.
Well, Raul, one thing I do want to say is thank you for your service, sir.
Proud to have served.
Thank you for everything you've done. And
Likewise.
Welcome home, sir.
Likewise, brother.
Yeah.
Likewise. Thank you.
As always, you guys, thank you for tuning in to an episode of Charlie Mike, the podcast. Remember, if you're in a crisis or you need help, please dial 988. You can also text 988. If you call 988, press 1. If you're a veteran, we love you. We want to see you. If you're in a fight, please reach out for help. As always, thank you for tuning in, and Charlie Mike. That's it, man. How do you think?